Okay, cool, fine. So, hi everybody, I'm Akshay from third year physics major. So, basically, what this initiative is for, what the aim is to start regularly meeting every week for basically anybody who's enthusiastic about computational physics. It doesn't even matter if you know what it means, if it just sounds interesting to you, if you're interested in coding in general and you're interested in physics, that's good enough for you to join us in our weekly sessions. So I'm assuming there's like a lot of MS-19 and MS-20 people here who may not have been exposed to this field before. So that's perfectly fine because we don't really, we're not really assuming any prior experience. So, okay, basically what I intended these sessions to be was somebody comes up with a problem or two problems, couple of problems. Basically, you can, and then what we do is basically it doesn't have to be a very well-defined problem. It can be pretty open-ended, and that's the point of this. The point is the exploration. And besides that, there's also the thing about like using plotting packages in Python, for instance, or using SciPy subroutines for calculating differential equations. You could always read about those things in the documentation and all that, but then you need some application to actually try it, and that's little hard to come by if you're just doing it by yourself. At least that's the problem which I faced a lot of time. So basically that's what I'm aiming this to be. And this week I've come up with the problems and also a small presentation about the theoretical stuff you need to start approaching these problems. But over the next few weeks, I hope that some of you guys can also put your perspectives, put your ideas, and let's see how that goes. So that's the plan for these sessions overall. Okay, so with that I will, okay. I think have some of you guys have already seen the two problems which I put for this week, which is one is on random walks and diffusion. Oh right. Also, if you have any doubt or any questions in the middle of what I'm explaining, please feel free to interrupt, and I won't mind. Okay, so yeah, I put up two problems. One is on random walks and diffusion, which is pretty interesting, I thought, and there are some questions which you can try out here. And if you run into trouble and stuff, you can just use the PyAI Discord server. Most of us, I mean, a couple of us spend like most of our day there, so we'll probably be able to help you out. So yeah, don't disregard your doubts as too simple or anything. Any questions is invited to be discussed. Okay. So, and the second question is about waves and strings. There's a differential equation, and then you want to simulate it on your computer. So you want to see a wave propagating and reflecting off all that. But then you have no idea how to start doing this because maybe you don't have any idea to do this. If you're not tried computational physics before, this might be pretty daunting to look at because, I mean, how do you convert a differential equation into something you can translate into a computer? So that's what I'll try to give you the ideas behind how you would go about doing something like this. Is essentially representing derivatives in a computer. And the random walks is just an extra bonus, which is pretty fun, I felt. So do that too. I think this last bit, this portion, this one question also relates to representing derivatives. So you'll see when you try it out. Anyways, moving on to the presentation. So can you guys see the presentation?
Yes, we can see it.
Okay, cool. So yeah, so as you can see here, I've written something called finite differences. Basically, this is the name of a method which we can use to represent derivatives on a computer. Let's look at what they are. Okay, so firstly, what we want to do is we have a given function, f of x. We have the functional form, proper analytical form. For example, fx equals sin x, I guess, or something like that, some proper analytical form. And we want to find the derivative at some point x equals x naught. But we want to do this on a computer. We can't actually find the derivative in its analytical. Well, we can. There's something called symbolic computing where you can given a function and it computes the analytical derivative, but that's not what we'll be talking about today. What we'll be talking about is a purely numerical way of finding derivatives, which is what will help us in solving these wave equations and other such equations that describe physical phenomena. Okay, so yeah, that directly you can think of the literal definition of a derivative, which is this fraction right here. Okay, that's not a d, that's supposed to be fx. But this is taken under a limit of x tending to 0. So the closer we get this del x to 0, the more accurate our derivative is going to be. And we already know the functional, since we know the function analytical expression, we can find out fx plus del x and f at x. So yeah, so you have a very primitive version of a derivative which you can now represent, but then obviously the errors are going to be really large unless your delta x's are really small. So this is not really the best way, but it's a start. Okay. So yeah, this was a more hand wavy argument with just directly assuming the limit and putting it into a finite version of that. So more rigorously, I guess you could say that you could write the Taylor expansion of f of x plus delta x and truncate it till the first order. Yeah, so you truncate it till the first order and then just rearrange the terms and you get this. But now what we have is we have a more rigid definition of what our error is. We know that now the error, when we find this derivative, falls off as delta x squared. So the smaller your delta x is, the error in your actual derivative to what you computed numerically would be dropping off as 1 over x squared. The error versus delta x. Well, this is not entirely true. This is just the error which you get from truncating this Taylor expansion. There's also another error which you could get because of the fact that computers have finite memory. So you can't exactly represent real numbers with infinite precision. So in that case, as your delta x gets smaller and smaller, the difference you have to compute here may also become smaller and smaller. So computers don't do very well with arithmetic when the numbers are very close by each other. So at that point, what happens is it starts rounding off numbers because there's only limited precision, and it starts chucking off this last few digits. So what happens is you have this truncation error which falls off as delta x, and the error. And on the other hand, as your delta x gets smaller, you have a round off error also. So then the net cumulative error in what your derivative is would actually be, okay, what they do? Yeah. The net effect would actually be something like this. So it wouldn't actually be completely decreasing as your delta x is smaller actually. So that'd be this small, nice sweet spot here, which you should probably aim to get. And after which it starts increasing again because your computer starts rounding off your numbers as they're becoming too small. So that's one thing to keep in mind. Okay. So,
hello, can you?
Yeah.
Why does it fall? Kind of. Why does it fall and why does it rise?
Okay, that's because there are two factors to the overall error in your quantity, which is okay. What's 1 second? Yeah, okay. So this is like the y-axis is the net error in your derivative, and the x-axis is just the delta x which you're using to compute this fraction. So now what happens is we have this Taylor expansion truncation error which falls as delta x squared. So that's going to get more and more closer to the actual value as your delta x gets smaller and smaller. Oh wait, did I do it reverse? Okay, that should be then, yeah, this would be the Taylor truncation error. And on the other hand, the machine epsilon error, as your delta x gets smaller and smaller, the not machine epsilon error, what am I saying? I mean the round off error. The round off error, which is caused by something called the machine epsilon, which is basically the smallest number, the smallest difference between two fractional numbers which your computer can actually detect. So that's called the machine epsilon. That's I don't know, that's pretty small. That depends on whether you're using a floating point number or a double floating point number or so on. Anyways, so
Like why does it increase and why does it exactly decrease kind of? Like or is it out of scope for the discussion? Or did you say
what
it
exactly is your question again?
as del x increases?
Yeah.
Why does the truncation error increase and why does the rounding off error decrease?
Del X is
Did you talk about it or is it out of scope?
I
Out of
No, no.
scope of
it's ulta, I guess. As del x decreases, the truncation error would also decrease, right?
The truncation error would go up, right? Because you're looking at a small difference, and you told us the smaller the difference, the more problems the computer has with it. then
No,
the truncation-
that's the round off error. Maybe I'm mixing the terms.
Okay, so you're saying truncation for the Taylor expansion.
Yep.
Yeah, that makes sense.
But why exactly does that happen when del x decreases? Why does truncation error decrease?
Truncation
When you write
right?
okay, actually, go ahead.
Yeah, okay. So, I mean, if you're explaining, sure, go ahead.
Yes, so when you write a Taylor expansion for something, you'll write f of x plus del x into f prime plus del x squared into f double prime of x, right? So f double prime of x is going to be something, right? It's going to be some constant. But the one thing which is changing as you drop del x is del x squared. Now that will go down as your del x gets smaller, right? Therefore, the whole error because of the Taylor expansion truncation will go down as you make the del x smaller. Does that make sense?
Oh, yeah,
Okay.
that makes sense.
Okay, cool. So now
About rounding off error then?
the rounding off error, as your delta x gets smaller and smaller, if you keep using, say, a floating point number,
Okay.
the floating point only has fixed precision. If you get too small of delta x, it doesn't really, it starts throwing off your numbers. Does that make sense? It starts losing the accuracy in your number.
Yeah.
It
I
can't
think
represent.
we can-
I mean, you can expand it to double float or something, but even then, at some point, it's going to hit that limit. So
Yeah, and we can come back to this a little
Hmm.
later also.
Yeah,
Otherwise,
yeah.
you'll start losing
Okay,
the
okay.
thing.
yep.
That's why I asked if it's out of the scope of this thing currently. Okay.
Okay, cool. So, anyways, if we look at this graphically, this expression, what this means is pretty straightforward, right? If we have a function and x, and you have the function's value at some finite number of points, and I want to find the derivative at say this point. Oh, no. Okay. So then what I'm doing in this specific formula is just taking the local slope with respect to the next point which I know. So that's one way I could do it. There's another way which you could think of. I could do this also equivalently. Why is this one side special? I could also take the previous point and say that's my derivative. On the other hand, I could also take these two and say this could be the derivative. Again, all this depends on how small your delta x is. Delta x would be the distance between these two finite points. So in that same note, these are the other two differences. There's a backward difference where we use the previous point, and the central difference where we use a point forward and a point backward. That is, if this is the point we want, we use these two and calculate the slope between that. Okay, so yeah, so we've done the first derivative in this way. In a similar way, we can write the second derivative in this form in terms of the first derivative, basically. And this is the forward difference, since we're using the next coordinate, and then this one. And now we already know the first derivatives expressions from the previous slide, so we just put those in. But here, if you see, I've very nicely I've used a backward difference here instead of a forward difference. I mean, this is pretty arbitrary. I deliberately did it so that I get this expression, because this is the most commonly used one for a second derivative. So you could ask me what is my motive here for using the forward difference for the first one and then randomly just switching to substituting the first derivatives using a backward difference, but I have none. Okay, I just wanted to get this expression. Anyways,
So for the first formula, you have used the definition that f double prime of x is equal to the derivative of f prime x.
yep.
Okay. Okay.
And then I've just used the same thing again, but for expanding the first derivatives. Okay.
Right.
So now next, let's move on. Okay. So now coming to the method of finite differences. You see here the derivatives which we have discussed. This one falls off as delta x square only. And for the double derivative, I've not even given you an estimate. So you should be asking me, what is this? Because any calculation we do, I'm not giving you an, oh no, okay. If I give you the value alone and I don't give you a bound on the errors, you should be asking me what are you doing, because it's pretty much a useless value at that point. So let's see what we can do about that. Yeah, how can you generalize this to say higher derivatives, and how can you get better estimates of the derivatives we have already calculated? So that's something we need to tackle. So yeah, can we get a better estimate? Of course, yes, that's why I'm doing this talk. So okay, here there's going to be a lot of messy math. I guess it's easy, it's pretty simple math only, but bear with me for 3 more slides. I just write the Taylor expansion for this, for 2 delta x plus delta x minus delta x and minus 2 delta x. So there are 4 Taylor expansions here. And now what I want to do with this is, basically what I want is, I want to get an expression for f prime of x or f double prime of x in terms of these functional values, because I already know the function. It's just a matter of plugging the x values to find these numbers. So my aim would be to get one of these derivatives as a linear combination of these functional values. So that's what we're going to try to do. So how we approach this is simply by multiplying each of the equations by a parameter and then add all the equations. So what happens then is, you will get on the right side, you would get just a linear combination of these 4 functional values. And on the right side, you'd get a bunch of stuff, okay? Also, you might be thinking, why I've truncated this deliberately at just x to the 4. I mean, at the third level, I'll just truncate it. So you will see that soon enough. So yeah, the LHS, yeah, the LHS is just simply the linear combination of the functional values. And the RHS would be 4 terms. That is, I just collected the terms for fx, f prime, first derivative, second derivative, and third derivatives. There's some messy algebra here. And then what you do is, you see there's something going on here. I mean, it's very indicative that I can reframe this whole equation as a matrix equation. I could just write 1, 1, 1, 1, 2, 1, minus 1, 2, and just copy these indices here. I mean, these elements here. And if I just multiply this to A, B, C, D, a column vector A, B, C, D, you'd basically get, this would lead to, okay, yeah, this would basically give me the coefficients of f, f prime, f double prime, and f double prime. I'm basically writing the same equation, but I write it as a matrix because matrices are very nice to deal with when your number of equations start growing. So that's what I've done here. And this column vector is basically the coefficient which is being multiplied to f, f prime, f double prime, and f triple prime. So we have this. Okay, so now why am I doing all this? Let's go back to this point. What I wanted was to get one of these quantities, fx, f prime, or one of these derivatives as a linear combination of this. So now I have the power to do that. All I have to say is, I want to set this. Oh no, it's not working. 1 second. Okay, all I have to do is say that since this is the coefficient of f, and this is f prime, f double prime, I set this to be 1, and this to be 0, this to be 0, this to be 0. So what does that say? That says that on my right side, I just basically all my derivative terms will be going to 0 because I explicitly set them to 0 here. So now what you can do is just invert this equation, get m equals h inverse of c. And m is basically this set of parameters which we multiplied. So now if you see, what we got is actually interpolation. So you see how that works? It's basically
What is interpolation? I'm not aware of what that is.
basically there are 4 points here, and the point in which I was focusing on was this point over here. Suppose I didn't know the function value here, but I knew the function values at these other 4 points. Basically, what I've done by setting this to 1 and this to 0, all of these are gone. I have the function value at x.
Yeah.
Function value at x in terms of the function values at these 4 points.
No, I'm just not like, I don't know what interpolation is as a concept. That's what I was asking.
So that's what interpolation is basically. By using the data available in the neighboring points, you just find
Sure.
probable functional value in between those points.
Fine.
If you wanted to use the data to find something, okay, the thing isn't working. 1 second. Yeah, so suppose you have these 5 functional values, and then I wanted to find the function value at this point, at this x coordinate, then I would do something called extrapolation. Using this data, I extrapolate what the function might be here. Same thing if I wanted a point here, what would the function value be? I interpolate using the data of these points.
Nice.
Yeah. So now similarly, now if now instead of setting this to 1, if I set this to 0, this to 1, this to 0, this to 0, now only the coefficient of f prime is there. So now what happens is I get the derivative of fx in terms of the linear combination of the neighboring points. This linear combination. So I have specific values of a, b, c, d such that I can get the value of f prime at x.
Can you repeat how you got the right hand side column vector?
Which
What exactly this is? This. Yes.
this basically, I see this equation is that, right? I mean, this one is just plus plus plus.
Right. You wrote it in matrix form, and yes.
So see what the matrix is. What does this multiplication represent? This just gives you a plus b plus c plus d for the first vector.
Right.
That is just this coefficient that I'm multiplying to fx.
Mm-hmm.
Similarly, the second entry in this would be what I'm multiplying to f prime of x, and so on.
Yes.
So I'm deliberately setting 3 of these to 0 and only 1 of them to 1. So the right hand side would only have one of these terms, and the left hand side would have all linear combinations of these functional values. So at the end, I'll get a expression for f prime of x just like this. Just like f double prime, I've got an expression in terms of 3 of the, I mean, here I have the function value itself also. So in terms of the neighboring points. So similarly, you can, I mean, the point is you don't know how to weight these functions, right? This weighting is what we are trying to figure out. We have the data of the functions nearby, I mean, the functional values nearby, but you don't know how they contribute to give you the data of the derivative at that point which you're interested in. So that's what we're trying to figure out here. Does that make sense?
Okay. Yeah.
Okay. So as you can see, like this method is pretty easily scalable. Like you can just you can just add more terms and then more number of points on either side.
So one just add a bigger matrix for, like, if I wanted to keep it for the fourth derivative or fifth derivative for higher accuracy. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, basically. So even here for the first derivative, now I have a 4-point formula for calculating it. And of course now the derivative error falls off as del x to the 4, which is pretty good compared to del x square. So just add more number of terms on the Taylor expansion, and you get calculate a, b, c, d, the weighting factors for the function values, and you can get an expression. You can get a finite difference. So that's why you call it finite difference, because delta x is all finite here. Even the derivatives are meant to be used in, I mean, they're defined based on infinitesimal values. We use a finite number of points just to extract the data of the derivative. Okay. So moving on. Okay, so now let's talk about the concept of discretization. What basically is in real life, of course, space and time are both continuous and have infinite extent. So, but of course, we want to simulate this on a computer which has finite memory, finite hardware. Each hardware can only carry a finite number of bits, and our floating point numbers are also truncated at some point. So we have all these troubles. So what do we do? Yeah. So what we do is, let's say for instance, we have some quantity y, which depends on the spatial coordinate x and the time t in this way. I literally just ripped this off from the wave equation, which should be tt square. But since that's the problem for today, I didn't want to explain that itself. So this may not be a very physical problem, but let's just say it is. Anyway, so in that case, what do we do? How do we represent this in a computer? So what we basically want is, we want to find y as a function of x and t. We want to see how it evolves in space and how it evolves over time. So to do that, we will, of course, to start with, we need to restrict our domain. We can't have minus infinity to infinity, because that's straight away gone, at least for now. So we restrict our domain to some x0 to xn. And then we just literally if this is the number line, we just divide it into equally spaced points with spaced evenly by delta x, which would just be xn minus x0 over how many other points you want to divide it by. Yeah. So basically this. That's all discretization is. So yeah, now we remember our aim is to somehow represent this derivatives in this new world we've created, basically a world where things only exist in discrete amounts. So what we do now is, our spatial coordinate gets turned into an analog, which is a discrete spatial coordinate. Our time also becomes discrete, and now our quantity y, which would be just a function of this. I'm just introducing a notation. This is a pretty convenient notation. Bottom one represents spatial coordinate and top one is time. Okay, so, and then, yeah, and this is pretty straightforward. I'm just going some a steps forward on my discrete spatial coordinates and time coordinate, and this is how it would change. So this is just some notation. Yeah, so now what I've done is, basically our equation was, okay, one second. Yeah, our equation was del y by del t c del y by del x. I've literally just done okay, you may ask, we only discussed normal derivatives, not partial derivatives, but it should be pretty obvious that basically this, yeah, you could see this as a 2D grid, like time and coordinate. Just use the values of the function you have along this. If you want to take a derivative, partial derivative with respect to x with constant time. So that's what I've done here. This is a forward difference derivative in the time. So only the upper index is changing, the lower index is same. So that, and then on the other side, this is just the spatial derivative where the time is now the same. Here, like j is the current instant and j plus 1 is the future. So one step into the future. Okay. So these are just direct forward differences. So we of course need to set some appropriate value of delta x and delta t. This is actually pretty important, because these are going to govern how accurate our simulations actually are, to how faithful they are to the actual differential equation, which is this.
So when you're calculating a difference over, let's say, change due to time, do you assume x to be constant for that little calculation that you're making?
Yeah, basically this is like at a specific x.
Yeah, fine.
This is just as it's this equation has indices, right? So it's a very general equation for each index I. So for each spatial coordinate xi, this equation separately holds for that.
I see. So basically, whenever you're looking for a change in x, you assume that those changes in x happen over a sort of line of different x's. But that x does not matter to the change itself. You'll just keep x as a multiplicative constant there, and then same with the time changes. Is that correct?
Yeah, pretty much. It's basically how we take partial derivatives in physics. Also, we just assume the other one is constant, right? So,
I see.
okay. So you just that's all. Okay. So we can cast this equation, just rearrange the terms, and now what you see is we've represented this equation in such a way that we now have the quantity y at the next moment of time, and this side all the quantities are in the moment j, which is the current time. So this should be, if you coded before, you should be seeing that this is pretty easily translatable to a computer program. It's just you have an array of y values, and I mean these indices pretty naturally just transform to indices in your maybe a 2D array, for instance. You can literally just write this in your equation, and you can update to find the next instant of y value. So you just iterate this through every position, all the positional coordinates. Okay. So now we've got a recipe. I mean,
Sorry. Yeah.
Yeah.
So to find the next step in time, we have to know the next step in position. So our
Yes.
yj plus 1 depends on yji plus 1.
Yes, I mean that you should be expecting, right? Because there is a literal spatial derivative here, so it is depending on how the function is.
Right.
Neighbors nearby.
So how would you find the evolution in space?
So for these equations, now what you do is actually 1 second. Okay. So what you do is you have an initial condition that you have y at for all x at time equals 0. You already have this. You're supposed to have this at least. This only you're going to evolve. So now once you have this, you just plug this into this. I already know all the y values for all the x at time 0. So for time y equals 1, I can find this iteratively, right? You already have all of these values.
Mm-hmm.
So again, now I'll have y1 for all x, and then plug that in again, you'll get y2 and so on. So you can keep evolving in time. Yeah.
Sure. Yeah.
Okay.
Makes sense.
So at this point, I could stop the talk and say that I'm done. Basically, this is the basic core idea in what you'll be doing, but there's something more we can do. If you look at this, there's some more structure in this. Like you should. Okay, let's see. The next slide, of course, is the power of matrices, because if there's a slight possibility for you to cast your equations into matrices, you probably should, because suppose say we have this, I mean, this is just the same equation. I'm not bothering with what the actual coefficients are. Suppose we have some simple relation out of some equation, we've calculated the finite differences and we've got this. So I'm sorry. Okay. Oh no, it's not working again. Yeah, okay. So suppose we calculated some finite differences, we got some expression on like this. So the same thing on this side, it's all the next time step, and this side it's the current time step values of the function in the current time step. So now what we can do is actually,
what are a and b?
Some coefficients. I don't know. They depend on delta x, delta y, delta x, delta t. I mean, we calculated this right here, right? This stuff.
Yeah.
I'm just writing this as some a, b, c. I don't know.
Okay.
Just for simplicity, that's not even the same equation. Like there are 3 terms here. Oh wait, no, there are 2 terms only. This is the same equation. Okay. There is
okay.
y here. Group them together, you'll get some coefficient here. Yeah. Okay. So that's what I've written here also. Oh God, it's not working. Okay. Yeah, I'm sorry. There's something new I'm trying out, and it is. Okay. So yeah, suppose we got the result of finite differences like this. Now I could recursively just apply this on an array of y values, just like I told you, but there's something more we can do. So yeah, the point is that even in Python and all these languages, the linear algebra subroutines are pretty well optimized, because at least in Python, I think they call upon the Fortran packages like super fast. So for linear algebra and probably other numerical crunching also. But anyways, so what we can do is we can interpret this set of function. This quantity y at j, we can interpret it as a column vector, because since there are only finite number of coordinates, I can just list them down in this vector type vector notation. So now why does this help us? So now I can also write like, okay, it's gone again, forget it. So I can also write yj plus 1 as another column vector. So now what I can do is, if this was my equation before, this finite difference, the result of my finite difference, I can just cast this operation of recursively doing it over, iteratively doing it over all of the coordinates into a simple matrix multiplication. You see how this cleanly fits into this equation. This gets multiplied to this. So the first one is
That's nice.
Hmm?
No, that's nice. That's a nice, like you see the multiplication happening clearly.
Yeah, that's pretty cool actually. That's why I wanted to let you guys know. Okay, so yeah, okay, so yeah, now we have this. So each row is like very neatly, we have just matrices. So if we wanted to find the evolution at n steps forward in time, you just multiply this matrix m times to the initial condition, and you'd get this vector, which is what you wanted. So yeah, so okay, one thing I nicely skipped over was, one second. Why do I use forward differences here? Why should I use forward differences? Forward differences actually gave me a very nice convenient form here, such that one side was all j plus 1s and one side is all j's. This is pretty cunning stuff which I've done behind the scenes. But you should be asking, why can't I just use a backward difference here? What would change? I'm sorry.
Because time goes only one direction or something. Is it like that?
No, I mean physically it doesn't matter.
0 point.
I just want yj plus 1. Doesn't matter how I calculate it. I just need it.
Okay. Like something like at times, like the initial time, you don't have anything before that kind of. So there will be a problem, right? So like say there is a time 0, you'll only have time the next time step. You don't have the like backward of that, right?
Yeah, that's
at that point.
Now for the y plus 1, I mean y at time 1, you still have y0. Okay, wait, I'll show you. That's actually not a problem. You can do this also. It's just it's different. It's not as easy to. I mean, it is easy, but it's not as straightforward, because let's say this was just j. This was j minus 1. This is yeah, okay. This doesn't matter. This could be anything, because I have all the yi's anyway. So it doesn't matter if I take plus 1 or minus. Well, it kind of matters. We'll get to that, but not in this scheme of things.
But what if j is 0? That's the thing. Like there's nothing before t naught, right?
Yes.
For difference, it's a problem.
We will get that. Wait. Okay.
Okay.
So now if I use a backward difference instead, what I'd get is, instead I would get j's here and j minus 1 here. No, wait. What do I get? Let's see. Okay, I don't know in terms of this equation what you get, but what you get is, now there are 3 terms in j and there's 1 term in j minus 1. So if you see j as the future and j minus 1 as the past, now you have kind of like a problem. You have yi j plus 1 and y some other I plus 1 j plus 1. And this is equal to some it's depending something on the previous time step. You know how to find the future. The future, like now you have, it's like a kind of, it's like coupled now. It's not as simple as just a single equation here. Now what happens is that this coordinate and this coordinate, both of these at the next time instant depends on this. So what happens? So what you can do is now this matrix representation which I introduced in the next slide is pretty useful. So just for you guys to reference, this method which I used here using the forward differences, it's called the explicit method of doing this, because you get explicitly you get a expression for yj plus 1. And this way, if I use a backward difference and I got into a mess like this, you get implicit. It's called an implicit finite difference. Okay.
So is there a case where you would want an implicit solution?
Yes. So what happens is there's a trade-off again. So now in this case, what happens is if I use the implicit method, I would get not this, but rather I would get j's here and j plus 1 on the other side. So that's how my relation would be. So yeah. So
what difference does it make?
J plus 1, right?
Yeah.
So now what you have to do is, since it's in matrix, now it's easier. If you are trying to solve that linear equation back, that would have been messy because so many. But now since it's in a matrix form, it's clearly obvious what you should do. You should just invert this matrix here, and you'll get the next time step. But now what happens is there's this added computational expense that you have to find an inverse of the matrix for every time step you have to step forward, as opposed to not doing that at all in the other case. So that's an overhead price you pay. But on the other hand, I don't know how to prove this. I've not done this, but the implicit method is more stable. That is, over time, the errors that this method gathers is lesser compared to doing a explicit method.
I see.
So you might want to look into why that is, but that's a trade-off here, computational time versus accuracy. So
I see.
okay, so now using the same matrix, I just wanted to end in something nice. So this, suppose I wanted to calculate the second order derivative of function. We found the central difference formula before. So now again, this can easily be discretized and written in a matrix form, and that would give you a nice matrix like this. See, in the middle, the diagonals are all -2, and the two off diagonals are all 1, with a factor of 1 over del x square. So these all the other terms are 0 because all the other spatial coordinates do not contribute in this expression. So what you get here is this matrix is what you'd call a sparse matrix. Okay, it's sparse because it's so sparsely filled. If you had divided your spatial coordinates into n coordinates, this would be an n cross n matrix. And if you very finely divide it, this is going to be really huge with more than half of the entries are just 0. So as opposed to a dense matrix, which would be like fully filled matrix or almost fully filled with not many zero values. So basically, your SciPy probably has some subroutines specifically for sparse matrices. That it doesn't even store your data in the normal fashion way because half of the things are 0. So it just stores your the places where it is non-zero and what quantity it contains. So that way, these inverting this matrix and multiplying a dot product, taking dot product with a vector, all that is like super fast. So I think you can try this. You can try directly using this as an array, put it in a for loop and start iterating against using a SciPy subroutine and stepping forward in time using a matrix. I'm pretty sure this would be much faster, but you guys should try that out. So yeah, so now I wanted to end this by saying, like, once you have this matrix representation, it nicely falls into this very nice form where, okay, I did not even write it properly. This second derivative operator acts on a function like it's a vector kind of a thing, and it gives you the second derivative. So I thought this structure which emerges out of this is pretty nice. You still preserve like operating on a function gives you another function in the vector space of functions. It doesn't matter if you don't understand it. Maybe you will appreciate it sometime in the future. Okay, so that's all I had to say about finite differences. That the presentation is over, and you would basically, I just described the full detailed steps to solve the second problem here, waves and strings. You just have to find the second derivatives here and do that stuff. Maybe use a matrix. You should use a matrix to use a matrix. It's super fast. So Yeah, okay. And the first one, first one is pretty simple. I'll not discuss it now. I guess you could discuss it in the Discord server if you have questions. And yeah, okay. So what else did I have to say? Okay, yeah. Also, one more thing. In this case, when we are doing waves and strings, the visualization is a pretty big factor here because, not for real research or anything, but when we are discussing among ourselves, it's always cool to see some nice animations and stuff. So I'm pretty sure some of you want to make animations, but then you don't know how to. So please do ask questions about that also on the server. We'll try to learn that together as a group also. So yeah, don't just focus on coding and just the theoretical part, but also presentation, because presenting your data, presenting your analysis is also a big thing in these days to attract people to actually pay attention to what you've done. So
Will the presentation series include data visualization tutorials as well?
and if you guys want, see, this one was just, I'm just trying to be a catalyst in what I'm trying to do here. I'm not going to be doing this every week. So if any of you guys know these stuff, so please step forward and do a session of your own so we can all learn together. Yeah, that's all I had to say.
I have a question before that. Yeah, so how do you use the discretization thing in programming? I don't get it. I got the concept, but I don't understand how you're going to use that in coding. How you're going to,
Okay. So
I mean, if you could just.
Yeah, I'll try to. Okay. Basically, what you want is, in the end, suppose I have this equation, okay, this y quantity is what I'm interested in. I want to know how y evolves in space and time. So what I do is I can't use continuous variables y, x, y. So what I do instead is I have an array called an x grid maybe. I have grid of x values where I discretize it as I've shown below with some spacing delta x. So this is one array I have, and then I have an array y values also in an element array. So now my function now basically this y of x is now in my code, it's just an array now. So this is the quantity I want to calculate. This encapsulates the what the function is, except in very discrete points. So obviously you can ask me, this is not a complete picture, so is this of any use at all? It turns out it is, but you'll have to adjust your parameters delta x and delta t accordingly. So anyways, now you have an array and array of values. So suppose you give some initial set of values for your y's, just the initial conditions, say in a wave you have an initial pulse, goes like this. So now what basically you do is I've done this discretization. I've got the evolution equation. What you usually do is in physics, you'd take that actual differential equation and solve it and find the solution, which will also be an analytical function. But then now I come into this new world where analytical functions don't apparently exist. They're just discrete sets of arrays here. So now I found the equivalent evolution rule for this set of arrays. I told you if you have the array of functional values at the previous instant, how you can find it in the next moment. So basically this encapsulates the same dynamics as you would require, right? Does that make sense? If you have a more specific question, I can try to explain.
Yeah, I guess I got it. So like using the array you find, so j plus 1 is just the next element. Is that what you're trying to say?
In time. So
yeah,
I didn't explain the coding implement, but if you try to code it, it should be doable. If you don't, you can always ask again. I can help you out. One of us can help you out. Yeah.
Yeah, great. Thank you.
No problem. Okay. So any other questions? Okay. So
Yeah,
Dhruva,
one more point that I had was that basically in the power of matrices, obviously the most interesting thing is that you don't have to write very complicated programs. All you have to do is encode this matrix, encode that large matrix, encode the small matrix, multiply them. And even nowadays with Python and NumPy or Julia or any high level language, you don't even have to write for loops to multiply. So obviously that's one. But the second more important thing is that this allows the fact that you can represent it in matrices, it allows you to use your GPU, which from a hardware standpoint, a GPU is much faster than your CPU for very specific things. And that specific thing that the GPU is so good at is matrix multiplication. So it does one thing and it knows it very well, and that is matrix multiplication. So what you would have previously written as multiple for loops saying, okay, j plus 1, all of that business, instead of that, encode the whole thing into matrices, push it on the GPU, ask the GPU to multiply it. It will multiply it and give it back to you. So this really speeds up computation. And the second thing is what is more, which is also useful, is that suppose I want to step my y through, let's say, 5 time steps. All I really have to do is just apply this big matrix of, A, B, whatever, 5 times. That's all I have to do. I don't have to run the loop again and again. Sure, internally there is some loop that's running to multiply the matrices, but it is very, very simplistic because of this.
They're also well optimized. So
Yeah. And now you don't have to optimize it by hand. You just have to optimize one thing, and that is how to multiply matrices fast. And that, because it's so useful, every language has a very fast way of multiplying.
okay, is that all?
Okay, so I had a question.
Yeah.
So we have like a definite method to find the best delta x, but how do you find the best delta t?
Okay, so if you have noticed in this whole talk, I didn't actually give you any rigorous way of how accurate my simulations actually are. Deliberately so, because these are not very easy things to calculate. That's this whole field in mathematics called numerical analysis, where you analyze these such algorithms which I've got from Taylor expansions. So maybe we'll link you to some of the relevant topics and you can explore those things yourself. So I mean, we can explore it together in the group, but not right now, because I myself also don't know how to do it properly. So
Yeah, okay, sure. Yeah.
anything else? Okay, so there was supposed to be some another-
Ansh, not Ansh, sorry. Arhan, if you want to share your screen.
Yeah, I'll take over.
Yeah, go ahead.
This is a very simple. So we didn't plan this. Akshay didn't tell me he was going to do finite difference. It just happened to be. So I have written a program which applies these in a very simple case. It's not even a partial differential equation. This is a normal, ordinary differential equation. I'll try to share it. Here we go. Let's share now. It's fine. Can you see this? Hello? Hello?
Are you still sharing?
Can you guys see this? Okay. Fine, so this was a project I did. You can read the specifics later. The main context of it was that I watched Grant's video on ordinary differential equation. He had a very nice plot of something. Should I show them the video, or is it like, will that be a problem? Okay, fine, I'll skip that then. So in this, he goes over several things about differential equation. It's very cool. You definitely should check it out if you have not. One of the ideas he talks about is plotting a phase space in order to see the behavior of a differential equation when you change the initial conditions. This is because they can, differential equations can be sensitive to initial conditions, and with a very different initial condition, the behavior can be very, very different. The example that Grant used was that of a realistic pendulum. So basically one that is subject to air resistance and moving at large enough angles such that the small angle approximation would not apply. So for this, of course, your analytical methods, at least the ones I know so far, would not work very well anyway. So because of the sin x term in the... So do you want me to write... So I'll just show you the equation for now, for the differential equation, which was somewhere here. This was a plot that I got from it. So yeah, this is the differential equation I'm talking about. So it's got a sin x term in it, so you cannot solve it with normal methods. So I wanted to solve this. I wanted to find a way to do it. Now, Akshay has conveniently explained most of how you do it. I'll just try to show you how you can program this. Of course, initially, you can go ahead and read I'll share the notebook to you later. You can read it. My goodness, this is hard without any visual feedback of what's going on. Okay. Yeah, so he's mentioned all of this. I've gone through the entire sort of, it's almost like a diary as to what happened when I was coding the simulation. I'll go over the specifics of the code right now. And so what Akshay was talking about is basically, and I think Sanjana asked the question, right? How do you put it into a code?
Yeah.
Yeah, you can probably take a look here. So basically what you do is, I'm looking for the pendulum equation, right? So I'm initializing a theta, which is at pi over 2. I'm initializing the angular velocity to be 0 for now. I'm defining a time step, 0.01. Then I'm writing a for loop for t in range, and then I'm stepping it for 12,000 steps because, well, that was a good number. I got a good plot out of it, that's why. And then I'll simply write the change in theta is equal to angular velocity into the small time step. And then I'll update the theta itself, which is theta plus the change. Then I'm doing the same thing with the angular velocity itself, which changes according to the differential equation we've been given, which is this. I've hard-coded the values for now because it's not really important for the programming aspect of things what the values are. And then you update the thing itself. Well, now, how do you output this? Well, one thing to do would be to say, okay, let's print theta, and let's see what happens if we do that. Poor Colab. It will have to go ahead and print all this. This is not a good way to do it. So we should find a figure out, because again, it is, first of all, it's numbers. We really don't understand things as numbers. And I really do want to have the same plot that Grant did, because it was just a very pretty plot. So let's see what we can do. How do you plot this? I had no clue. Okay. I was like, hoga kuch. So I hit Google. I'm like, okay, what can we do? So there's a library called matplotlib that does this. To plot, you have to first store the values of the corresponding time steps in a list. And then you can just give it the command plt.plot, and then your x coordinate, y coordinate, followed by plt.show. There were probably commands to do stuff like label my axes and whatnot, but I didn't do that. I had a very bad indentation error. I think I sent the image to Dhruva or something. It looked strange. So anyways, this is what I did next for our program, which is I started saying, okay, initial conditions are set. Now I'm writing an empty list first, which will then be appended into and populated by the values at different time steps. Post that, all I said was plot this and then show me my plot. Pretty simple. Like, I'll need a bit of, if anything is making sense or not. I have no idea if it's going over.
Yeah, it is. So wait, you basically use, have you used discretion here?
I've used what?
What's the term? I forgot.
Discretization. Yeah, so this is what I did, right? I said there's a small time step delta t. For that time step, it will follow. So basically, when you take, let me pull up my whiteboard. I think this will help. Okay. Yeah, so I'll try to explain what's going on here. Yes, I want to be in tablet mode now. I'll stop sharing for a second. And I will present now. I'll show the entire screen. Sure. Hopefully, I have my whiteboard here. You guys can see this? The whiteboard loading, but it's being shared.
Yeah, you can see it.
Never mind this. We'll create a fresh one. Okay, so let's say you've got something, right? You've got a differential equation which tells you d2x over dt squared is minus something omega squared minus whatever mu. Why am I writing a theta when I say mu? What it says minus mu into dx over dt minus what was the other term? Does anyone remember? I have a bad memory. Let me check it out. Yeah, it was sin x. Minus some constant k into sin x. Correct. So now I don't, it's very hard with computers and discretization to solve a second order differential equation. So what I'll do is I'll write this as, I'll write dx over dt as a term v. Now this of course d over dt of dx over dt itself is our d2x over dt square. Correct. So now I can write dv over dt is equal to minus mu v minus k sine x. And then I have another equation. I've got the other equation which tells me dx over dt is v. Now these I can work with in time nicely. Like all I'll say is now dt is small, right? So for this, I will do something that I'm sure my 12th grade math professor would have killed me for, but I will define a change in velocity as minus mu v into this small delta t minus k sine x again with this small delta t. Does this make sense? Hello?
Yeah, I guess.
So-
Yeah, I'm still getting a hold of it, bro. Wait.
Yeah, so now all I'll do is a change of v to v plus delta v will basically be governed by this time step, right? You'll have this time step in this equation. So you can just update this for consecutive terms, right?
Yeah, I guess I'm getting. Yeah.
Similarly, x equals to x plus delta x. This is basically what this is discretization in a single variable setup, I guess. Which
Right.
is essentially what I've done, right? I've done this again and again using a for loop with a time step being 0.01 seconds.
Okay.
And all of this is stored in the list which I've defined. Dhruva, do you have something to add?
Yeah, I was just going. It seems like you've shown a very nice mathematical definition of discretization. I just wanted to, at least the way that I think of discretization is like this. Suppose you have, let's say a ladder or something like that, right? You can't be anywhere in between two rungs. You have to be on either of the rungs, which means that you can either be on the first one or the second one or the third one or something like that. You can't be anywhere in between. And however, the wall that you're scaling, the wall is there everywhere. So for example, if you take, let's say, a scale which is only marked at 1 centimeter. So what you're saying is that I can tell you whether I'm at 2 centimeters or 3 centimeters, nothing in between. But the thing that I'm measuring is definitely continuous. Well, at least for simpler stuff, it is continuous. So the difference is basically like you're breaking up a continuous object into small squares. And the reason that we have to break up this continuous thing into small squares is because if I don't have it, then I have way too many things. For example, if I had to count all the points on a scale, right? There are infinite number of points, and definitely for any computer to store infinite information is impossible. So instead what we do is we say, okay, for me anything less than 1 millimeter doesn't matter. So now what I have done is I have reduced my 2 centimeter continuous scale to simply 20 different points, each 1 millimeter apart. So there you lose accuracy, definitely, but in return you gain finite memory. So at least you can do something with it. So discretization over here in the case of programming is similar. Instead of looking at 0 seconds and then 0.00000 go on and on and on and then 1, I say no, that's too less. I'll say 0 and then 0.0001. Anything in between these two, I say doesn't matter. These two are the next time step. It's like the difference between it's like a clock. A clock goes tick tick tick. It doesn't tell you the time between two ticks. Similar.
Okay, that's a very interesting way to talk about this. So, can you ask me, like, because again, I'm not quite sure what you understood. So just ask me questions with respect to the code that I'm currently displaying. Do you have any questions? I'll just try to answer those.
No, I was basically looking at the essence of discretization, and
Yeah.
I got that. I mean, I guess for the code, I'll have to do it myself once again to like actually know.
No, but take a look at it. If you have anything which, if you see a part of it which doesn't make sense, just ask me, because that's probably the best way to do this.
Okay, do you think you have time to like talk about it once more?
I think I do, but like, I don't know what to, go over. Yeah, so does anyone else have questions?
Yeah. So what? So like this will continue throughout the week. Like all the doubts and things, we'll have it. We have voice channels on the Discord server as well. So you can just join the server and like any doubt, anytime you can just ask people on Discord. We have a very friendly type of discussions there. If you have, you can ask the doubts now, and then if you have more doubts, you can just join the server and
we'll definitely be sharing this notebook, so you can just go over it, because I've written
we'll
a
also
lot.
share these notes with you,
A
and
lot
then you
of-
can go through them, and then yeah.
The reason I didn't go over it completely was a lot of it is something that Akshay already went through, and then I didn't want to give you guys double, thing. So, does this code make sense to everyone? Does it? A yes is also an answer.
Yes.
Okay. I just
Yeah.
okay. So
You don't, the point isn't the talk is just to give you a small start off into something that you guys can do yourself,
I see.
right? So we want you to, I mean, we'll all do it, to try out the questions that are there in this thing. But let's say you're not interested, you can just not do it too.
Azad, you are unmuted.
yes, I want to say one thing.
Oh, go ahead.
MS20, do you guys know what open and closed boundary conditions are? Like, is there somebody who doesn't know what these are?
I don't.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. Right. Yeah. I mean, isn't it better to at least set them off on it? Because I guess it can be done later. But it's kind of important in the sense that you can't do anything without it. Like the other things, you can still do something without solving those questions.
I see.
Yeah, so the moment you start writing it, you'll realize that even in Akshay's definition of everything, he looked at j and j plus 1. But what about 0? What about the last one? What about j is equal to n? There is no n plus 1 defined. There is no minus 1 defined. What do you do to deal with these? Those are your boundaries, and that's what you need to somehow define them. So you guys try it out yourself. If you guys have questions, you can always ask. You can search it online also, but I suggest you try it out yourself first. Think logically what you could put. and go ahead from there.
So anyways, I kept all of these in the list, and then I told it to plot it for me, and I got this nice inward spiral of a plot. Let's see. So what can I say? Yeah, so this is position. So the x-axis is position and the y-axis is angular velocity. And you can see, because this dissipator is going in, had I, dropped the dissipation term, it would give me a perfect ellipse. But of course, it's not very interesting to have just one plot. You want to see the behavior of a system as it evolves with different initial conditions. So we'll just use a for loop again. We've already done it once. We use a for loop, and I'm simply changing the initial conditions here. So I have pi over 2 as my initial angle. But now with every change in S, so every iteration of the plot, I will add pi over 10 to it. And this will give me this nice snail shell-like plot. You can see here, in between you've got a dot. This is because, unlike the pendulum you probably have in your mind, this pendulum that I have defined is one where you've got a rod stuck to it. So when you actually put it straight up, the rod will stay in position. It will be an extremely unstable equilibrium, but it will indeed be an equilibrium there. Therefore, it's not moving. But this was not quite the plot that we had in the video. How many of you have seen it? Like, if I can get an idea, how many of you remember the plot itself? What's different about my plot that was there in that plot? Hello? Yeah, that's true. So, okay. Fine. I'll just go over it then. So in that plot, we had a changing. So here you'll see I've still conveniently kept omega initially 0. But in his plot, he'd been changing that with time also. So initially I came to this and I was like, this isn't quite what it was. I think I can pull up something. Let me see. Where is my...
To contract or expand.
Can you see this? This is the plot that I was talking about. So, is this visible?
Yep.
Yeah, so this is slightly different from what I have, right? Because of the upper sort of this flow from here to here is not quite the same. Mine was a very discrete flow in this array itself. This is because I have not plotted it such that the initial angular velocity is changing. It's always 0 in my case. So I went ahead and I said, okay, let's have that change too. And I'm just using this little function here. Just, make it depend on S itself too. So now it changes with each iteration. And this is the exact same plot. I've made less because, well, computation issues. So yeah, there you have it. The basic idea is to discretize it as we talked about, use for loops, store the data in a list, and use matplotlib to plot and show it. Does that work?
If everyone's okay with this, can we discuss animation, please?
Yeah, I would like that too. I've been, yeah. I see.
One way what you do is that you create a lot of images, save them all to a file, to different files, and then use some external tool to create a GIF out of it. This is one of the easiest ways to do it. Otherwise, of course, there is another way that you can search up online, where you basically create something known as a animation object, and then you keep putting images into it, and then it's a little bit of a pain for in Matplotlib at least. But
Yeah, so for the
depends on-
Matplotlib one, right? For the second method you described, where you make the animation object.
right, I mean, but the point is that that's not something that's really to discuss. It's syntax
Okay.
you can look up online every time that you want to make an animation. But the aim,
I think we can sometime discuss it over on the Discord group
Yeah,
also
that too.
if people can send some references to it.
I'll send my code. You guys help me figure it out.
If any of you guys like code your stuff, like share your results and share like how you implemented those, so others can also see.
Yeah, I mean, I've got a Lorentz attractor in progress here, and I have no idea how to animate it. I've like got it updating and all, but like no idea how to like plot it or animate it.
Okay, we'll figure that out. But first,
Yeah.
If you guys don't already, try to get used to uploading your code on GitHub and using Git. Or I mean, maybe Turing Club might have a session on that. But
Yeah, someone please do. We need
yeah, it's really useful to share code and look at it in that way. So.
Like does like the Fiat email ID have a drive that we could share it to?
nice.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah, you have my notebook too, right? So can you share that to everyone too?
yeah, sure. Any notebook that I have, I will share. But for others to share their code, just do that. Or yeah, I mean that's how you do it. Or you could in fact just put it up on your drive and then send me the link. I'll download it and put it on the website as a temporary solution. Once we get to, I mean, once Turing does that event, whenever it does it, then I guess you guys can start sending PRs and stuff like that, which is a more better way of doing it.
Fine. Yeah, if anyone has any questions about my, you can read the notebook and then you can send me questions on Discord. Just at me, it's fine. I don't mind.
Yeah. Yeah, so it's getting very late and people are very hungry, so we'll stop here.
Yeah, we'll stop.
Yeah.
Wait. One last thing. Wouldn't explain why.
Just ending note. So we plan to do this every week. So like people can come forward with people will come forward with topics they have done or they have explored, and you can just come here and talk informally. It's not a talk sort of thing. Like Akshay has just started what exactly will do. Someone will come and just tell what they have done, and then people will explore over our Discord and stuff. So it's more of a discussion. So we are hoping that all of you participate more.
Yes, I had something.
You didn't explain why you call it egg paratha.
Sure. Okay.
So basically what happened was that I was creating the repo for create the website and stuff like that. And it was late at night. It was like 3 a.m. yesterday night. So what I just did was that I asked Akshay was online at that time, saying that give me a name. He's like, bro, I don't have a name. So every time you create a new repository on GitHub, it suggests a name. And the name that it suggested was Fantastic Couscous or something like that. So I was Fantastic Couscous is too not Indian, so instead I just put egg paratha. That's all. There's no reason for it. It was clickbait.
Okay.
Come to these events.
Okay.
So please continue the Discord. Don't.
We will stop the meeting.
Yeah.
Thank you all of you for coming, and we hope we'll get more participation in the future.
Wait, by the way, the physics club account is Abbas.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah,
Okay.
I'm Avas.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. I don't know your voice.
Yeah. Thanks, Akshay, for a wonderful talk. Like, we really loved it. And Arhan codes that he wrote, I have seen the notebook, and you'll love to, like, if you haven't done this sort of thing, you'll love to go through it. And he's written explanations also properly, and you'll get a lot of stuff.
Thanks.
Thank you all.
Later.
Yeah.
Bye bye.